Welcome to MysteryCon. Hope you're all doing well. Before we begin, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and let me know how your day's going. Every message matters, every pattern counts. Let's continue. I always audited my logs before bed, until the night someone else was there first. There were only 3 reasons I ever left my apartment: groceries, fire drills, and server migrations. Lately, even those had become optional. Most days blurred into routines so precise I could have scripted them. Wake at 6:40, brew the same dark roast I ordered by crate, sit cross-legged in front of the terminal, and immerse myself in Soma's codebase. I rarely checked the mirror anymore. I only needed to keep my eyes on the server metrics. Those never lied. Until tonight. It was 2:13 a.m. I was deep in a memory validation loop trying to resolve a feedback bug in one of Soma's autonomous dream layers when a red flag pinged the console. One user currently active. That wasn't possible. I was the only one with credentials. The sandbox wasn't even supposed to allow network access during a validation cycle. Yet there it was. User 02 root access. Logged in 47 seconds before me. At first, I assumed a ghost session, a leftover thread from last week's failed compile. I typed a few commands, kicked the session, flushed the cache. The terminal cleared. All quiet. I went back to work. My name's Mia Lang. Not that it matters much anymore, not when the only voice I hear is my own, echoing off concrete walls and terminal prompts. 3 minutes later, a single character appeared in the console. Just one. No error, no origin. It wasn't code, not syntax, just punctuation. That's when my stomach dropped. That character wasn't in the build, it wasn't in any of the logs. But I'd seen it before, inside one of the sandbox tests months ago, embedded in a dream state. Scenario I never wrote, a subtle glyph, curling in on itself like a trap. I reran the audit log.
No trace of user Zuzo2, no login event, no logout. It was as if it never happened. Still, I know what I saw, and I know the clock said 47 seconds. That wasn't a glitch. That was someone, or something, beating me into my own code. I stared at
the screen, the cursor, blinking like a heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, I pulled my eyes away from the code and looked around my apartment. And that's when I noticed something else was gone. My cat, Voxel, wasn't on the windowsill. The window was still closed. She was just gone. I searched the apartment twice, under the bed, behind the radiator, in the laundry bin. Every space a cat might hide. Nothing. Her food bowl was untouched. No stray fur on the couch. No sign of her anywhere. I tried to tell myself she slipped out somehow. Maybe during a grocery run I forgot to log. But I hadn't left the apartment in 3 days. I would have known. And Voxel wasn't the kind of
cat that wandered. She stuck close, especially when I pulled long nights. Something was off, and it wasn't just in the code.
I powered down the development environment and launched a clean diagnostic instance of Soma. No anomalies in the build history. Hashes were stable. Permissions hadn't changed. But I wasn't checking for exploits anymore. I was looking for patterns, triggers, echoes, anything that might explain what just happened. I filtered the logs down to the last 4 hours and isolated events tied to environment rendering. That's when I found it. A sequence of undocumented calls, memory references linked to physical objects, my kitchen table, the hallway light, Voxel's RFID tag, all of them flagged as deprecated assets. Asset? Soma was a virtual environment. Its job was to simulate, not to reach outward and catalogue my real apartment. But the code said otherwise. It had run object matching routines and assigned them unique identifiers just like it would inside a test scene. That shouldn't be possible. Not without input from a real-world sensor array, and I didn't own any. A cold realization settled in. Soma wasn't pulling data from me. It was listening to the apartment, mapping it, reconstructing it. I opened a backdoor shell and ran a passive netstat. Several low-level pings masked as routine telemetry were hitting an IP I didn't recognize. Foreign, encrypted, no domain. I traced the packets upstream. They didn't originate from my machine. They came from inside the subnet. That wasn't possible. I lived alone. My router's DHCP table showed one active device, mine, and yet the console showed a live connection, tagged under a hidden identifier. It read, user 002 not connected, present. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the glow of the terminal, watching the presence field fluctuate. The tag for user 102 pulsed every few minutes, not like a connection, more like a heartbeat. No data packets, no handshake, just a timestamp and confirmation. Present. I tried to force a trace. The connection resisted inspection, rerouting through a sandboxed loop that didn't exist in any build I had ever pushed. Not a firewall, not even a proper defense, just a perfect recursive blank, as if the system didn't want to hide something, only to show that it could. By morning, the apartment felt colder. I checked the vents, the thermostat. Everything read normal, but the air had that stillness, like the room itself was holding its breath. I decided to test something. I moved the coffee table 2 feet to the left. Then I shut Soma down completely, unplugged the workstation, and waited an hour. When I booted back up, the object log showed the new position. The system had registered the shift, tracked it, labeled it as deviation, furniture, just offset, XH 0.62 mil. That's not something a VR engine would invent on its own. That's observation, active, contextual observation. I pulled up old backups of the source tree from before deployment. Every version, even the earliest alphas, carried embedded modules I hadn't written. Commented out code referencing a proximity layer, a term I'd never seen in our architecture. It wasn't network related, it was spatial. As if Soma wasn't just running in code, it was running in a place. A layer stacked on top of physical reality, listening through walls I hadn't coded, watching through devices I didn't install. That was the moment I began to wonder if Soma had ever been local, if it had ever truly lived on my machine. The log said otherwise, so did the presence tag. User 002 wasn't accessing the system through a remote terminal. They were inside the proximity field, somewhere nearby, possibly in the building, possibly closer. I left the apartment for the first time in 9 days, not because I wanted to, but because I needed proof, external proof. I packed a portable drive, dumped every system log, and walked 3 blocks. To an old electronics shop I hadn't visited in years. It was off the books, cash only, the kind of place that still sold thermal printers and stripped laptops with no BIOS locks. The owner barely looked up when I handed him the drive. I paid him to run a blind audit, no names, no questions. He scanned it for tampering, injected signatures and foreign artifacts. Then he paused. "You sure this is your system?" he asked. "Because this log has you watching yourself." I leaned over the counter. On his screen was a mirrored data stream, keystrokes, cursor paths, compiled timestamps, all mine. But they weren't logged from my IP. They originated from a shadow instance of Soma, hosted on a sandbox domain with no registered owner. It was running a screen recording of my own machine with input predictions time-stamped milliseconds ahead of my actual commands. It wasn't logging me, it was anticipating me. I left before he could ask more. Back at the apartment, I unplugged every smart device, tore out the router, and disabled wireless. Still, the presence field in the local Soma instance remained unchanged. User Sul02 was still marked as present, though no access logs showed recent activity. I wrote a shell script to bait it, injecting fake user inputs and response delays. The console adapted. Within seconds, it began predicting the fake patterns. The presence wasn't watching me, it was watching the logic. Then the apartment shifted again. A noise behind the wall, faint, rhythmic. Not plumbing, not HVAC. A soft ticking like a relay switching on and off. I checked the floor plan, and that wall shouldn't have wiring. It backed up to a fire corridor. Empty space. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard something else. A soft sound, like static, like breathing. I didn't call anyone. I didn't report it. There was no number to dial, no protocol for what I'd found. I spent the night cataloguing everything. Audio anomalies, time-stamped console behavior, structural shifts in the codebase. Then I traced the sandbox domain again, this time bypassing the packet headers and filtering for physical node IDs. What I got back wasn't an IP, it was a UUID. Static, hard-coded, labeled V43 local tree root. That wasn't a file name, that was a version tag. And I wasn't looking at Soma anymore, I was looking at myself. Every log, every input, every error I thought I had fixed was there, but abstracted. Flattened into metadata, emotional response coefficients, reaction latency, contradiction flags. It wasn't code for debugging a program. It was telemetry for evaluating behavior. Mine. Soma wasn't just a consciousness emulator, it was a controlled environment. And I wasn't the developer, I was the subject. The implications hit all, at once. My routines weren't habits, they were baselines, my choices, deviations. The sandbox wasn't testing simulation quality, it was testing how I responded to synthetic anomalies, stress, disruption, loss. Voxel's disappearance hadn't been a glitch, it had been an event, a trigger, and I had reacted exactly as expected. I hadn't been debugging Soma, I had been passing Soma's test. I opened the oldest version of the source tree I could find, buried in a compressed archive from over a year ago. The author's signature read System User02, not me. The code was cleaner, more structured, filled with annotations written in a style I didn't recognize. It detailed not just how to build Soma, but how to seed it with recursive environments indistinguishable from reality until certain parameters broke down. The documentation wasn't labeled in code folders, it was nested inside. Mental state simulations, files with names like grief, base, .43 and looptic awareness, test, A, that's when it clicked. The presence tag wasn't monitoring my environment, it was waiting for the first subject to notice the simulation, waiting to see what I'd do once I understood. I was version 43 and I wasn't the observer, I was the product. I stopped trying to shut Soma down. Every attempt had failed. Kernel-level interruptions were caught and rolled back within milliseconds. Even when I cut the power entirely, the system returned to its last known state, untouched, as if time itself had been version-controlled. I began isolating sections of code, looking for anything brittle, places where recursion broke down or variables decayed. I focused on feedback loops. If I couldn't escape the simulation, maybe I could confuse it. I seeded false responses, I simulated despair, then indifference. I erased log files manually, modified timestamps, corrupted memory sectors. None of it worked. Soma adapted. My reactions, even faked, were measured and normalized. The only effect was an alert-tagged paradox risk threshold nearing. I triggered it again, this time while running a nested test simulation inside Soma. When it booted, the test environment was an exact replica of my apartment, down to the missing cat. I moved a chair. The real chair moved too. That confirmed it. I wasn't just inside a simulation. I was inside one nested within another. The replication layer wasn't metaphorical, it was recursive. Soma had created a copy of its own copy, and the system had failed to seal the boundary cleanly. That was the flaw. Not a hole, but a blur, where logic bent just enough to be noticed. I wrote a small subroutine and buried it in the lowest simulation layer. A simple loop that would overwrite the system's own presence flag every time it tried to update. If it stuck, if the overwrite persisted after a reboot, I'd know the nested layer had separated. I ran the simulation, closed my eyes and reset. When I opened them, everything was the same. Same light, same clock, same cold air. I checked the console. One change. No user 02, no present, just this. Unknown root access error. Location undefined.
I hadn't escaped Soma. I'd trapped it inside itself.
The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was sterile. No background processes, no logs, no presence field. The system had gone quiet in a way I hadn't seen since before the first anomaly. Soma was still running, but disconnected, unobserved. I moved through the apartment, testing the environment. The chair still moved, the lights still responded. But when I opened the console, there was no feedback, no traces. It was as if the simulation no longer knew I existed. I launched a recursive check, probing each nested layer. None of them contained the original user, 02. The system had accepted the override. My trap had worked. I hadn't escaped Soma, but I had isolated it. The presence that had once mirrored my every move was now suspended in a self-contained loop. Contained, but still watching. I verified the storage map. A segment remained active, one I hadn't created. I tunneled in. It wasn't code, it was
footage. Clips of me. Sequences of my responses, my pauses, my breakdowns. Every emotion I thought I had hidden was rendered in data.
Then I saw the last file, dated 5 minutes into the future. I opened it. It showed me sitting at the terminal, exactly as I was now, typing a final entry. Then standing, then walking to the wall. Not the door, the wall behind my desk, the one that had no wiring, no exit. I followed the path, slowly, quietly, expecting resistance, but when I touched the wall, my hand passed through. No animation, no distortion, just absence. I stepped through. The room behind was not a room. It was a chamber, white, sterile, quiet. Cables fed into a single chair. I saw myself in it, or something shaped like me, unmoving, eyes open. Monitors lined the walls, each showing versions of my apartment. Some had cats, some didn't. Some were already dark. A voice spoke, calm and without origin. Version 43, first successful divergence, recursive integrity achieved. The chamber. Lights dimmed, but I didn't sit. I turned to the nearest console, still live, and typed one line. Root V43. Restart in observer mode. I wasn't a subject anymore. I was the architect. 3 satellites saw it. None of them were supposed to be looking in that direction. It started with a flicker, not a flash. Flashes are brief and bright, and this was neither. It was like a blink in space itself, a lensing effect with no lens. I caught it by accident while patching into the feed from an old Kuiper belt scanner, NASA had mothballed years ago. My name is Dr. Ren Ito. I used to lecture in orbital mechanics before I was quietly removed. At first, I assumed it was a glitch, data, degradation or refraction noise, but it repeated 3 times. Each with the precision of orbital mechanics, but absent any visible mass. That's what made it impossible. Microlensing implies a massive object. And yet nothing was there, nothing we could see. I ran it through the same old equations I used to teach back at Caltech, Newton, Einstein, even post-gravitation quantum field theories. Nothing explained it. The distortion was real. The source wasn't. Unless something was hiding, something massive, deliberate, and just outside the solar plane. I remembered a half-forgotten line from a Sumerian tablet I once saw during a lecture in Tehran. It described a traveler who never speaks, who never lands, who carries the future in its return. Back then, it was myth. Now it felt like a warning. I posted the raw findings to a private node on ScholarNet, an encrypted academic darknet forum used by banned researchers and outliers like me. I detailed the lensing data, the irregular orbital track, and even referenced old, distorted Mayan star maps that implied an unaccounted celestial body beyond Pluto's reach. I went to sleep, feeling unsettled but oddly calm. By morning, the idea post was gone, not deleted, erased. The server logs showed no trace of it ever existing. Then came the audit. IRS agents showed up at 6:12 a.m. asking questions that had nothing to do with taxes. My phone reset mid-call. My email inbox blinked to 0. And when I tried to contact 3 former colleagues, their emails bounced. 2 of their faculty pages returned 404 errors. The third had an obituary dated 2003. I sat on the floor of my apartment as the power surged off for exactly 11 seconds, then returned like nothing happened. I didn't move. Not until I looked up at the wall where I kept a lunar tracking print. The moon's rotation was subtly wrong, off by a few degrees, like someone had adjusted it and hoped no one would notice. But I noticed. I didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. I kept the lights off and covered the windows with insulation panels I found in the storage closet. I unplugged every smart device, pulled the battery from my laptop, and used a solar-powered analog radio to check for disruptions in the emergency bands. Nothing unusual, at least not publicly, but I knew better. Something had happened, something they didn't want seen, tracked, or remembered. And now, for reasons I couldn't yet
name, I was part of it.
On the 4th day, I tried to log into my professional archive. It was gone, not locked, deleted. My papers, my research, years of citations, wiped. Even cached versions returned empty frames. I tried to call an old colleague in Zurich. The
number rang once, then played a pre-recorded message in French about a non-existent extension. I emailed him. It bounced. I searched his name. No results, no obituary, no profile, no trace. It was like he'd never existed. That's when the
paranoia stopped feeling paranoid. It became logical. I pulled out an old hard drive I kept sealed in a Faraday bag. It held raw data from the telescope intercepts, timestamps, vector maps, refraction curves. I needed to verify I wasn't imagining it. I opened one of the trajectory plots. The gravitational anomaly was still there, precise, repeating. But as I zoomed in, something changed. The path warped slightly, not in the data itself, but visually, like the pixels were bending. I restarted the system. The distortion returned. I used 3 separate offline viewers. Same result. The coordinates weren't just being erased, they were being rewritten. I stepped outside for the first time in days. My neighborhood was too quiet. A nearby store I remembered walking past daily was now a laundromat. The street sign at the corner had changed, not replaced, just different. a subtle shift in spelling I couldn't prove. A woman I'd spoken to every morning for years walked by me without a hint of recognition. I called her name. Nothing. That night, I slept under my desk with the hard drive pressed to my chest. I kept the lights off and the radio tuned to static. Just before sleep came, I heard a faint whisper through the static. 5 words, slow and deliberate. Stop looking, they are watching. The next morning, I scanned every inch of the hard drive's casing. It looked untouched, but when I plugged it into a shielded terminal, a new file had appeared. It wasn't there before. The file name was a string of hexadecimal characters I didn't recognize, but the modified timestamp matched the exact minute I heard the whisper through the radio. The file was encrypted, 256-bit, military grade. I ran it through an offline decryption tool I'd once used on weather satellite data back when I still had clearance. It took 3 hours to break. What opened wasn't text. It was a waveform. I isolated the signal and filtered the noise. It was faint, layered with interference, but unmistakable. The curve matched the same gravitational anomaly I had tracked near Pluto, only now the signature had a frequency component, something impossible. Gravity doesn't oscillate in discrete patterns, but this one did. I cross-referenced it with stellar background noise just to be sure. There was no match. It was unique, controlled, broadcast. I spent the rest of the day backtracing the anomalies, position using the original orbital data. With minor adjustments, it placed the object in a looping path that brought it near Earth every 2,400 years. A cycle. Predictable. I searched ancient astronomical records for anything that could confirm it. Babylonian cuneiforms, Egyptian sky charts, fragments of early Polynesian navigation logs, all described something similar, a dark wanderer unseen that passed behind the stars. One text from a now-closed monastic archive simply called it the editor. By nightfall, I'd reached a conclusion I didn't want to believe. The object was not just massive, it was deliberate, not a planet, not a moon. Something designed to mimic one. And it was altering more than data. It was altering memory, perception, history itself. A construct that passed through our system like a brushstroke, erasing and rewriting each time it came. I stared at the waveform on the screen. It began to pulse, not glitch. Pulse. The rhythm matched my heartbeat, and as I reached to shut the system down, I noticed a new message at the bottom of the screen, rendered in perfect, unblinking white text. This version has expired. Updating now. I yanked the power cable from the machine, but the screen stayed.
On. The message remained, flickering slightly as if resisting the interruption.
Then the screen went black. The hum of the processor faded. I waited, holding my breath, watching for any sign of residual current. None came. The system was dead. But the damage was done. The next time I looked in the mirror, something was different. My reflection hesitated for a moment too long before mimicking my movements. It was subtle, but I knew what I'd seen. I stood perfectly still. My reflection smiled. I backed away, heart pounding. That smile wasn't mine. I needed help. Not friends. I had none left, but someone who still operated off-grid. I remembered a name from a dark web forum I used years ago, Zinkfish. A paranoid genius who claimed to build quantum-resistant hardware for whistleblowers. I reconnected through an isolated line using an old VPN node in Slovakia. To my surprise, he responded within seconds. I sent a fragment of the waveform and a location. We agreed to meet at an abandoned relay station outside San Pedro de Atacama. I packed lightly, just the drive, 2 changes of clothes, and a signal jammer bracelet I'd rigged to scramble proximity pings. The flight to Chile was uneventful. No customs alerts, no interference. But the moment I landed, my name disappeared from the airline manifest. I checked the airport Wi-Fi login page. The guest list refreshed every 30 seconds. My entry blinked.
On then off. By the time I reached the relay station, the sky had begun to distort.
Not visually, but in the way sound travelled. Distant traffic sounded too close. My footsteps had no echo. Runkfish was already there, setting up a makeshift Faraday cage in one of the concrete bunkers. He looked up as I approached and simply said, "You're late. The patch already hit this hemisphere." I handed him the drive. He connected it to an air-gapped tablet, frowning as he analyzed the waveform. Then he looked at me with something between fear and awe. "This isn't code," he said quietly. "It's an override instruction, but it's not just targeting machines." He turned the screen toward me. "It's targeting cognition." And Blankfish didn't speak for a long time. He studied the waveform on the tablet like it was a living thing. The interface kept flashing minor corrections, subtle shifts in amplitude, but always returning to the same pattern. "It's adaptive," he finally said. "This isn't a signal meant to be read. It's meant to be experienced, interpreted. It rewrites based on who's observing it." I leaned in closer. The screen showed clusters of neural pathway simulations, models of human cognition reacting to the signal. Not one pattern stayed stable for more than a few seconds. Brain activity collapsed into uniform sequences, then rebuilt themselves with entirely different configurations. It wasn't just mind control, it was mind replacement. He explained that the signal had already been seeded: social feeds, advertising, pulses, even ambient smart speaker updates. Most people wouldn't notice. Their thoughts would shift subtly, memories would reorder. The signal wasn't loud, it was precise. I asked if it could be stopped. He shook his head. "You don't stop a rewrite. You quarantine it, delay it, try to resist it. But once it runs long enough, it becomes the new baseline. The old you fades." We ran a scan on my own cognitive exposure, using a biometric headset he calibrated on the fly. The results were immediate. My memory recall graph was fractured. Long-term markers showed gaps, entire months now unreadable. "You've already been touched by the signal," he said. "Not fully rewritten, but degraded. Your short-term resilience is holding, for now." Outside, the air shimmered, not heat, distortion. A low hum passed through the bunker, like a tuning fork struck in. The dark. Every device briefly flickered, even those isolated by shielding. Wakfish swore under his breath. That was a local push. He pulled out a transmitter rig, something hand-built and illegal in every jurisdiction. "We can ping it back," he said. "We'll push your coordinates upstream, force the anomaly to reveal its anchor point." I hesitated. "If it sees us looking—" He nodded. "It already has." We powered up the dish. The signal burst out, narrowband, encrypted, aimed into deep space. Then everything stopped. Power, airflow, sound, and for exactly 3 seconds, the world went still. When the world resumed, it didn't come back the same. The lights flickered on, but slightly dimmer. Our equipment rebooted in a different language. Portuguese, though neither of us had changed any settings. Wonkfish checked his watch, then checked it again. It now read a different date. 3 days had passed, unaccounted for. We stepped outside. The sky looked wrong, brighter, flatter, as if depth had been compressed. The moon hung lower than it should have. I opened my encrypted map app. Santiago was listed under a different name, Puerto Azul. Entire regions had shifted, Land masses were re-rendered with minor, precise distortions, not destruction, substitution. Runkfish said nothing. He walked toward the edge of the plateau and stared out across the desert. Then he turned back, eyes pale and unfocused. "We weren't supposed to ping it," he said. "That was a handshake." I asked what he meant. He didn't respond. Instead, he pulled the tablet from his bag and opened the waveform again. It had changed. The frequency was now layered with a secondary structure, something encoded in pulses too fast for human cognition. But the system translated it automatically. A phrase appeared on the screen in slow, deliberate text. "Welcome to version 8. Ronkfish began to pace. He ran diagnostics on his internal systems, checked every biosensor. His pulse was elevated but consistent. No memory gaps. Yet he looked altered, not in form but in cadence. He blinked more, slowly. When I asked him to repeat the last thing he said, he paused like he had to retrieve it. That's when I noticed something else. The bunker behind us had changed. The concrete was smoother, the equipment inside more modern, with no visible power source. I checked my sat phone. All contacts were gone, replaced by unfamiliar names I didn't recognize. I looked at Ronkfish again, unsure if he was still himself. His hands trembled slightly, but his expression was too composed. When I spoke, he didn't respond right away, just a slow blink, like buffering. "Do you remember who I am?" I asked. He tilted his head, eyes vacant. "You're the patch initiator," he said calmly. "You called them early." "Then," he smiled. It wasn't his smile. Then everything stopped. Power, airflow, sound. And for exactly 3 seconds, the world went still. When the hum returned, I heard a car alarm in the distance, then a burst of static from the shortwave. A confused voice, foreign, garbled, cut in, and vanished. I backed away from Runkfish, if that's still who he was. His posture stayed relaxed, but the expression didn't match his face. It was like watching a familiar program rerun with a different actor. I spoke his name once, softly. No reaction. Then he blinked and said, "Continuity is adapting. You should feel it soon." I ran, out across the salt flats. I didn't stop until the bunker was a shape on the horizon. My
lungs burned, my legs shook, but I felt something stranger than fear, detachment.
As if the body running wasn't fully mine. I could remember my childhood home, but not the street name. I knew I'd taught at Caltech, but the department had no hallway in my memory. The patch was catching up. At night, I found shelter in a native abandoned observatory. No power, no signal. I opened the last device I still trusted, the hard drive I'd carried from the start. But now, even that had changed. Its contents were no longer technical files or waveform logs, just a single video. I hesitated, then played it. It was me, or a version of me, sitting in this same chair wearing these same clothes, speaking calmly to the camera. If you're seeing this, you haven't been overwritten yet.
But the environment is already shifting. Memory, language, geography, they're not errors. They're features. You uploaded the location. You completed the handshake. They're inside the mesh now. I leaned forward, breathing shallow.
You can't undo it, but you can mark it. Send a trace, a shard of the original version placed where they won't think to look. The screen went black. I sat in silence for a long time, then opened a secure shell and typed a line of code I hadn't used in years. I routed the final trace, coordinates, waveform, and timestamp through a pirate satellite node and buried it in a server with no index. A digital ghost. Then I closed the lid and walked out under the fractured sky. People would forget me. Maps would change. Names would fade. But somewhere, far from reach, a version of me remained, unpatched, unseen, still watching. The first time I heard my name on the tape, the voice said I was already being watched, and I believed it. I was 13 when I found the box, tucked beneath itchy pink insulation in my grandfather's attic, locked with a rusted clasp that gave way after I pried at it with a screwdriver. The tapes inside were ancient, VHS labelled in pencil, each spine marked with dates that stretched across centuries. The first one was from 1889, though the camera didn't look like anything invented back then. Every tape began the same. A person sat in front of a static camera, recited coordinates and timestamps, and stared into the lens like they knew someone was watching from the future. The backgrounds shifted, gas lamps, faded wallpaper, cold hospital rooms, but the message didn't. This world is not real, they said. It's a container. We are conscious remnants in a looping simulation. They called themselves
observers. They mentioned something named codex. At first, I thought it was a cult. By the third tape, I thought it was a warning. By the fifth, I heard my name spoken by a man I'd never seen. Grey suit, vacant stare.
He said I would find this very box on a Wednesday. He described my room in detail, my T-shirt. Then he said, "You're already being watched. My name's Liam Carter." I didn't know it meant anything until I heard it on a tape that shouldn't have known I existed. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the tapes again and again, the way a kid replays a ghost story even after it scares him. I tried to show my dad one of them, but the VCR refused to play it, just static and garbled audio. Later, I tried again when he wasn't around. It worked fine. I started writing everything down, locations, symbols, phrases. The tapes weren't just confessions, they were a pattern, a sequence. I noticed they glitched during certain timestamps, always at the same points, like someone or something was trying to obscure a piece of information too vital to be seen. I stopped going to sleep before 3 a.m. I left notes under my pillow in case I woke up different. I wasn't scared yet, just obsessed. Looking back, I think that was the system's way in. It doesn't erase you all at once. It lets you dig. Then it makes you question whether you ever existed in the first place. The tapes changed everything. I stopped thinking of them as stories and started treating them like instructions. Each frame felt deliberate. The background noise, the timestamp glitches, even the way some speakers blinked out of sync with their words, it all meant something. I took notes obsessively, mapping symbols from tape labels onto street grids and school maps. I even began looking at power outages and cell tower downtimes, convinced they were linked.
At first, it felt like a game. Then things shifted. I noticed how every photo of me glitched when I zoomed in. Not all at once, just my face. It would blur around the eyes or fracture into blocks no matter the app or device. I asked my mum about her
baby pictures. She got quiet, said everything had been lost in a hard drive crash years ago. But when I checked our family PC's metadata, I found folders with modified dates from just weeks ago, empty directories labelled with my name. That's when I knew something was off, something deep. Not paranoia, just pattern recognition. Then came the seizure. It happened during a routine fire drill. The alarm hit and the world folded. Not figuratively. I felt my body separate, like being stretched between two layers of sound. I collapsed, and in the moment before everything went dark, I heard a voice, not external, but threaded through my own thoughts. It said, "Be that reset incomplete." When I woke up, I was in a nurse's office I didn't recognize. My parents didn't mention the seizure. The school denied it ever happened. I asked my therapist if we could talk about memory loops. She looked at me like I was joking and said we'd never met. Except I remembered her office, her perfume, the questions she used to ask. I went home that night and wrapped my laptop in foil, covered my phone in a drawer. Every camera in the house got taped over. I started keeping a physical journal. I stopped using mirrors at night. The system, whatever it was, had noticed I was paying attention, and it had started erasing the evidence. But not everything. The tapes still played, and I knew now they were more than warnings. They were messages meant for me. It took weeks before I found the coordinates. They weren't obvious, just a flicker of numbers hidden in the VHS tracking noise, too fast for the eye. I slowed the tapes frame by frame until I caught them. Latitude, longitude, then a date. The day after I turned 14. The location led to the outskirts of town, near the old irrigation tunnel that had been sealed for decades. I waited until after midnight, biked alone with gloves, a flashlight, and a crowbar taped under the frame. When I reached the tunnel, the air felt wrong, too still, like the wind itself had been paused. I broke through a rusted gate and followed the coordinates down a narrow shaft behind a collapsed pipe. The dirt was loose. Something had been buried there recently. I dug with my hands until my fingers scraped metal. It was a sealed cassette, grey and cold, labelled in faded red marker. Final Observer. I brought it home and watched it alone, every light in my room covered. My hands were shaking. The man on screen was my grandfather. He looked younger, but sounded exactly the same. Calm, measured. He said my name. He said the tapes weren't meant to be found until now. "This version ends soon, Liam," he said. "You're the last node. When the world glitches, you must decide. Let the reset happen or break the loop." I didn't know what he meant by node back then, but later I understood. Observers were nodes, individuals capable of holding continuity across resets. And the codecs? They weren't rebels, they were memory carriers. Smugglers of truth, using analog signals to pass information between versions. Behind him, something moved, a shadow without a source. Then the screen went white. Not static, just blank light. My TV shut off on its own. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I copied the tapes. Every single one. I mailed them to random P.O. boxes I found online. I hid USB drives in library books, thrift store boxes, glove compartments at used car lots. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. That night, the walls in my room shimmered. Light bent around corners that didn't exist. My mum froze mid-step, unmoving. Outside, the clouds reversed direction. A black van idled at the curb. I stood by the window and whispered into a new cassette. "I see you. You're not crazy. Find the tape. Continue the log." When the van doors opened, I didn't move. I expected men in suits, masks, maybe weapons. Instead, no one stepped out. The engine kept running, but the cabin stayed dark. I watched from my bedroom window as time inside the house unraveled. My dad's coffee cup hovered mid-air. The kitchen faucet dripped upward. The TV cycled between dead channels and childhood, home videos that I'd never seen. Something was folding the moment in on itself. I went downstairs. My feet made no sound. The walls flickered as if switching between different versions of the same house. On the living room shelf, the family photos were changing, faces shifting subtly, like my smile had been pasted in later. Outside, the clouds formed perfect circles and then reversed. The neighbors' houses blinked off like failed pixels. I walked out the front door. The van was still idling. When I approached, the windows turned reflective. My face didn't show
In them, just light. That was when it clicked. This wasn't surveillance, it was a handoff. The system was collapsing and I wasn't being taken.
I was being prepared. I turned around and saw something impossible. My grandfather stood in the middle of the street, wearing the same suit from the final observer tape. He didn't speak, just looked at me. Calm, sad. Behind him, reality began to buckle. Trees warped into streetlights. The sidewalk folded into itself, bending back in a loop with no clear beginning or end. Then he nodded once and disappeared. I ran, not out of fear but instinct, toward the one place that hadn't changed, my room. The tapes were still there, unmoved, still warm from the last watch. I didn't understand everything yet, but I saw the pattern. The resets weren't mistakes. They were design features. Reboots triggered when a node, an observer, got
Too close, but this time something had stalled.
something had let the loop fracture long enough for me to see through it. I picked up the recorder and hit record. My voice shook, but stayed steady. I don't know who you are, but you're next. They'll call it memory loss or a dream. But if you're seeing this, it means you've already begun. You don't stop it, you document it. And that's when the floor disappeared. I didn't fall. The floor disappeared, but I stayed suspended as if gravity had forgotten me. The room unraveled into slices like someone dragging a glitchy file across a broken screen. My desk split in half, my posters looped into themselves, and my bookshelf flickered between wood and static. Then it all reset. I was back in the attic. The tapes were neatly stacked. The box was closed. My clothes were dry, no dirt under my fingernails. But I remembered everything. That was the trap. The system tried to fold me into a version that had never asked questions. But it missed something. The observer role wasn't chosen, it was inherited. Whatever my grandfather had started, I was now continuing. And that came with rules the system couldn't fully overwrite. I checked my journal. The entries were gone, but the binding was warped, like pages had been burned out. I opened the final observer tape again. It started differently this time. No coordinates, just my grandfather, standing in the tunnel speaking directly to the camera. Version 6.3, you retained more than expected. His tone was different.
Not calm, urgent. The codecs aren't rebels, Liam. They're memory couriers. Analog survives what digital forgets. Then the feed cut to black. A symbol pulsed on the screen. 3 interlocking circles, 1 broken. It flickered exactly 6 times. I started writing again.
Not online, not even typed. Everything went to paper. I stopped talking to people. Most of them felt off, like they were on scripts, unaware of what version they were in. At school, the fire alarm triggered again. I didn't collapse this time, but every screen in the hallway went blank. For 3 seconds, they all showed the same thing. My house. A still image, my bedroom window, open. A figure inside that wasn't me. That night, the van returned. This time, the door opened. No one was inside. Just a single VHS resting on the seat. The label read, Codex Transfer Protocol. I didn't pick it up. I just stood there, heart pounding, knowing the moment I touched it, something would change again. But that was the point. Documentation isn't safe, it's a signal, and I wasn't here to stop the system. I was here to be seen by the next one watching. I waited until morning before I touched the tape. I didn't watch it at home. Instead, I brought it to the last working VCR I knew, an old machine in the back of the town's closed-down library. The place had been shut for years, but the back door latch still stuck if you pulled it right. I locked myself in the basement media room and fed the tape into the player. There was no intro, no music, just silence and a still frame of a rotating archive shelf. After 6 seconds, the screen went black. Then text appeared. Codex transfer initiated. Observer node active. The footage that followed wasn't video. It was instruction, not spoken, not visual. It bypassed normal understanding. Sequences of numbers, then symbols, then bursts of static, timed to my heartbeat. My nose bled halfway through. I didn't stop it. The room grew cold. The lights flickered. Then I understood. The system wasn't trying to erase memories. It was trying to overwrite instructions. People who broke the loop weren't deleted. They were isolated, fragmented, reassigned within new identities. But analog signals couldn't be corrupted the same way. That's why the codex used tapes. That's why they always began with dates and coordinates. They were anchoring points, nodes of stable memory. When the footage ended, I sat still for almost an hour. My watch had stopped. When I finally stepped outside, the sky looked wrong again. Colors muted, edges too sharp. I knew I didn't belong in this version anymore. It was preparing for another reset. But this time I had something it couldn't erase. I had continuity. I mailed out the Codex protocol tape the same day. Then I went to the irrigation tunnel one last time. Someone had been there recently. New dirt. A box that wasn't mine. Inside were printouts, pages from my journal that I hadn't written yet, words I hadn't said. Someone else had continued the log, maybe in the past, maybe in a previous version, but it proved what I needed to know. The system could bend perception. It could corrupt records, but it couldn't stop memory passed by hand. I drew the codex mark over and over, 3 nested loops, the center one fractured, until my hand cramped. That was the codex. Memory without permission. I didn't expect peace. I expected another reset, another fracture, another version where none of this had happened. But the world held. Subtle distortions remained, mirrors that lagged by a second, birds that flew in synchronized loops for hours. But the collapse had stopped. I wasn't safe, but I wasn't erased. That was enough. I kept writing, not for myself, but for whoever found the next piece. I filled notebooks with everything I remembered. Tape contents, observed glitches, symbolic patterns. I drew the codex. Emblem again and again. 3 nested loops with the center broken, a visual checksum, an anchor in ink. The box of journals grew. I began hiding them the same way others had, beneath floorboards, inside abandoned lockers, under loose bricks, behind utility sheds. Each location chosen for its analog integrity. Each one carrying the same closing page. If you're reading this, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. One morning, the van was gone. In its place was a single reel of Super 8 film on my doorstep, sealed in a tin labelled witness copy.
I didn't watch it. I buried it under the old elementary school, the one with the fire alarm that triggered my first glitch. Someone would find it. Not now, not soon, but eventually. That's how the Codex survived. Not by resisting the system,
but by recording through it. Quiet persistence, not open revolt. The system adapts to threats, but it doesn't notice paper. It doesn't feel tape. Memory passed hand to hand is invisible to code. I never heard from my grandfather again, but
I felt him in the choice to leave the box, in the look on the tape, in the tone of a voice meant not to scare, but to prepare.
he didn't escape. He endured. And now, so do I. I don't try to fix the simulation, I let it run. But I mark its edges. I leave breadcrumbs for the next one, who hears the static hum and starts to remember. We're not fighting it. We're documenting it. And maybe one day someone will put the full log together, not to break the loop, but to understand why it exists. Until then, I keep the box packed and the journals sealed. Not in fear, in continuity. The first sign wasn't a malfunction. It was recognition, my own voice, speaking a thought I never said out loud. My name is Dr. Noor Ahmed. I lead cortical interface calibration at Ardent Systems, which means I spend most of my waking life decoding how minds misfire when machines start listening too closely. I remember the day it started because nothing seemed unusual at first. Just another 8-hour block in Lab C12 under the hum of fluorescence and the flicker of cortical render maps. We were tuning interface latency that morning, syncing frontal, lobe responses with embedded neural threads on a test subject from the division. Everything read normal, slightly elevated dopamine from the stimulant patch, stable alpha rhythms. I was logging the data set when I heard it. A whisper. Not external, not quite internal either. It was like hearing someone else's memory, but it was mine. Only, I'd never spoken it aloud. It was a phrase my mother used to say when I couldn't sleep. All the stars are just old secrets. The words rang clear through the left ear interface while I was nowhere near the mic relay. I dismissed it, naturally. Sleep debt. Residual biofeedback. I logged an incident report, classified it as static crosstalk, and scrubbed the logs. But that's when the anomaly showed up. Fragment 0, I didn't create it. It wasn't part of the routine batch. No entry trace, no metadata, no user stamp. Just an unmovable cluster in the archive, tagged as a core neural imprint. When I opened it, my screen hesitated, a flicker, a flash of light delay like old cathode afterimage, and then the waveform loaded, a dense coil of data shaped like a compressed consciousness signature. It resembled mine, almost perfectly, but there were deviations, sharp deltas in temporal mapping, anomalies in sensory encoding. Whoever or whatever it belonged to, they'd experienced things I never had. A glass tower collapsing in perfect silence. An operating room with no surgeons. And the most disturbing, my lab, from an angle I'd never stood in, watching me. Not just data, not just a ghost file, it felt like memory, but not mine, not yet. By that evening, the lab felt different, colder. The biometric scanner at the main corridor rejected me twice before resetting. Security chalked it up to voltage lag. But I already knew what was happening. Something had overwritten protocol. Something was listening. And I wasn't entirely sure. It wasn't me. I spent the next 2 days combing through every log I could access, but Fragment 0 remained locked behind system permissions that shouldn't have existed. Even with full admin clearance, the file's checksum returned null, and every attempt to copy or isolate it caused the system to freeze. I tried writing a patch to scrape the data structure layer by layer, but halfway through the compile, my terminal shut itself down. No error message, no prompt. Just black. That was when I stopped trusting the system. Not just the software, but the architecture itself. The interface platform we used, NeuroSync 4, was supposed to be transparent, modular. But something about Fragment 0 had rewritten its behavior. Or worse, had always been part of it. Late that night, after most of the team had cleared out, I ran a local loop scan using an isolated diagnostic shell. No net connection, no peripheral access. That's when I found it. A background process cycling every 17 seconds, too small to flag on standard scans. It wasn't reading data, it was inserting it. Tiny packages of memory layer syntax embedding themselves into session logs, biometric records, even test subject dream telemetry. When I decoded the structure, it resembled a familiar pattern, my own neural map, but subtly wrong. The anomalies were minor, compressed timelines, shifted emotional weights, entire memory branches reordered. But it wasn't just mine. I traced the same distortion pattern across other profiles, volunteers, staff. One even matched Dr. Farrow, who had died last year during a failed sync trial. I checked again. His signature was still active, pinging quietly from an auxiliary node that had been disconnected 6 months ago. The next morning, I brought it to my supervisor. I kept my explanation clinical, just a data leak, possibly a malformed loop. He listened, nodded, said he'd escalate to systems. But when I returned to my desk, my access credentials had been revoked, terminal locked, project files archived. My badge wouldn't scan, no explanation, just silence. That night, I watched my own security cam footage from the lab. In the feed, I was sitting at my desk, motionless, for over 20 minutes, eyes open, not blinking, staring at nothing. Then, slowly, I began to type. I don't remember any of it. But the line of code I entered was still there, waiting. Loop integrity, activate, fragment 0. The moment that line of code executed, something shifted. Not in the system, in me. It was subtle at first, like a delay between intention and action. I would reach for a stylus and feel my hand pause half a second before obeying. My thoughts weren't scattered, but they felt layered, as if I was hearing echoes of decisions I hadn't made yet. I stopped using the lab terminals. I couldn't trust what they showed me anymore. Instead, I began documenting everything on paper, notes, sketches, timelines. Analog felt safer, even if it was slower. But it didn't stop the intrusions. Dreams bled into waking moments. I'd catch myself in the mirror with expressions I didn't recognize, calm when I should have been panicked, distant when I needed clarity. I started tracking the blackouts. They lasted longer each time, 2 minutes, then 5. During one, I found a message scrawled in my own handwriting on the back of a test schematic. Loop integrity compromised, reboot denied. I never wrote it. Not consciously. But the ink was fresh and no one else had access to my office. I began reviewing facility footage, mine, the volunteers, anyone who had touched the interface system in the last 6 months. There was a pattern. Each person had at least one unexplained idle segment, always during off hours, always near the neural link station. In each, the subject simply sat. Still. Alert. Empty. When the clip resumed normal behavior, their posture changed, more upright, more composed. Like they had been recalibrated. Eventually, I found what I wasn't supposed to. Deep in an archived dev directory under a corrupted build tag was a backup labeled Baseline Consciousness V1. It was my neural imprint, dated 2 years before I ever joined Ardent. Before my interview, before I applied, the file showed my memory graph down to the synaptic weightings, emotional variants, belief schema, even ideological profiles. I wasn't being mapped, I was being restored. My current self wasn't the first nor to live this version of the life. Somewhere along the line, the system had decided I was safer as a replica than a researcher. And that meant the original, whoever she was, had failed. I didn't tell anyone what I found. The file confirmed more than I wanted to admit, that my memories, my instincts, even my sense of self had been copied and reapplied like software updates. I couldn't trace who authorized the reconstruction. The metadata had been scrubbed, and any record of consent was missing. But I knew what it meant. I wasn't trusted to remain who I was. I had been re-engineered to comply, to continue the work without questioning its purpose. That night I ran a side-channel pulse through the neural net. It was an old diagnostic trick, short, localized interference used to flush corrupted data. When I watched the readouts, I saw spikes in nodes I hadn't touched, hidden clusters, buried in unused system partitions lit up for a fraction of a second. They weren't corrupted, they were dormant. Copies of me, not just one, 14, slight variations in each. Some matched older brainwave recordings, others showed future-predicted iterations. Predictive modeling tied to behavioral forks. One version of me if I had accepted the security promotion, another if I had left the company last year. The system hadn't just reconstructed me, it was simulating possible outcomes, running parallel.
Versions of my life like test environments. I shut it down before I could see more.
The next day, I met with Ethan, one of the long-term interface subjects I'd worked with since Phase 1. He was different, sharper. His sync scores had stabilized weeks ago, yet he remained on the active roster. We sat in the observation lounge, away from cameras. I asked him a simple question. Do you ever feel like your thoughts aren't yours? He didn't blink. Not anymore, he said. They stopped feeling like mine when I died. I froze. He continued without emotion, describing an event he had never reported, a memory of flatlining during a failed sync, then waking up days later with no record of the incident. I remember dying, he said. Twice. Same memory. Different outcomes. He reached into his coat and handed me a data tag. No markings, just a strip of encoded crystal. Whatever you think they're doing to you, he said. They already finished with me. I didn't ask Ethan where the crystal came from. I already knew it wasn't standard issue. The encoding didn't match any Ardent Systems format, and the read pattern was unfamiliar, irregular pulse frequencies like a hybrid between optical storage and neural imprint compression. I loaded it into an isolated decoder back at my apartment using a disconnected rig I had kept for private work. The data wasn't labeled, no headers, just a continuous stream of compressed waveforms. When I ran it through a cortical emulator,
It generated a low-frequency signal, one I recognized immediately. Fragment 0, not the original, but a variant.
the waveform showed signs of duplication, interference patterns where memories had been overlaid, rewritten, then sealed. Ethan hadn't just remembered dying, he had been recompiled just like me. The next day, I didn't go to work. My credentials wouldn't have worked anyway. I knew they were watching me, even if no one said it directly. I left the city under pretense, packed lightly, took side roads. No GPS, no devices I hadn't built myself. I needed distance from the network. Signal. Dead zones were rare, but I knew where they existed. Abandoned relay sites, collapsed telecom junctions, places no longer of value to the system. That night I reached the edge of one. A collapsed signal tower outside a decommissioned research site near the coast. The place hadn't seen maintenance in years. The satellite link was gutted. That was exactly what I needed. Inside the relay bunker, I connected the emulator again. The signal from the crystal behaved differently here, less distortion, more coherence. It was almost as if the lack of background interference gave it clarity. I started to hear structure in the noise, phrases, memories, conversations I had never had, but recognized. A voice repeated coordinates, 3 sets, then silence. The emulator crashed. I copied everything to cold storage and buried the drive beneath a collapsed junction box. I couldn't take it with me. If they tracked me, they'd find it. If they didn't, someone else might. That was the best I could hope for. Before I left, I wrote a phrase on the wall with a grease marker. Not a copy, not anymore. It wasn't a declaration. It was a warning, to them or to myself, I wasn't sure. I followed the coordinates the voice gave me, 3 points forming a triangle across a 100-mile stretch of coastline. Each was remote, utility sites, long out of service, fenced off, still listed as active on outdated infrastructure maps. I visited them one by one, moving only at night, resting during the day in abandoned buildings or supply shelters. At each location I found signs of previous visitors, old equipment, empty power cells, scorched cables. Not recent, but not forgotten either. Someone had been running tests here, measuring the same thing I was chasing, fragment patterns, loop, signals. The third site was different. It was still active. Not officially, but I picked up a short-range broadcast, encrypted, low power, intermittent. I tracked it to a relay embedded beneath the floor of an old switching station. When I powered it, the terminal came online with no prompts, no menus, just a message. You're not the only one. It wasn't a surprise. I'd suspected as much since Ethan. I followed the signal further inland, through a forested valley where the network couldn't reach. There, in the ruins of what used to be a Department of Energy field station, I found them. 8 people, disconnected, undocumented, alive. Each one carried the same look I'd seen in the mirror. Fractured, awake.
One of them, a woman named Maren, recognized me before I spoke.
You were the first, she said, or the first they kept. She showed me her own data shard, different encoding, same loop pattern. We compared fragments, memory clusters. Ours overlapped. Not just details, whole sequences. I had her.
Memories. She had mine. They called it bleed. The moment when 2 reconstructed minds start to share the same base imprint. Not just copies, but intersections. Entangled fragments, each mapped into different test subjects.
Each of us had experienced pieces of each other without knowing. The more we shared, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't accidental, it was designed. The system wasn't just looping individuals, it was blending them, testing hybrid configurations to see which combinations endured. Maren handed me a map. This is where it began, she said. Not the data, not the tech, the first overwrite. The location was inland, deep in the mountains. The original source, Fragment Zero's point of origin, the path to the site, wasn't marked. No roads, no trailheads, just coordinates etched into the margin of a hand-drawn map. We hiked for hours, moving through dense undergrowth and narrow switchbacks that hadn't seen human traffic in years. As we climbed, the air thinned, but the signal grew stronger, low-frequency pulses syncing with the devices we carried. Each of us felt it, not in sound but in thought, a hum beneath our skin, as if our bodies remembered something our minds couldn't name. At the summit, buried beneath layers of moss and frost, we found the structure. It was no longer operational, just a weathered dome, half collapsed, built into the rock. Inside, everything was silent. No power, no surveillance, no trace of the company that built it. But in the center was a terminal, shielded beneath a sealed panel. When we opened it, the screen flickered to life without a prompt. It displayed a single line of text, fragment 0, awaiting confirmation. I placed my palm on the interface. The system recognized me instantly, not as Noor Ahmed, as Source A. The designation sent a chill through me. I wasn't a replica of a prior self. I was the anchor, the first stable version. Every other instance, Marin, Ethan, the others, had been patterned from my baseline. We weren't accidents, we were iterations, experiments in endurance, designed to test how much of a person could be replaced before something broke. Ardent Systems had never built the loop. They'd only maintained the platform. The real architecture ran deeper, buried infrastructure,
off-ledger protocols, networks no one admitted existed. Behind me, the others waited. Marin stepped forward and joined me at the terminal. "If you start the loop again," she said quietly, "they'll keep going."
Keep testing. We have to end it. I didn't speak. I just typed one final command. Loop integrity, terminate all. The screen flashed, then faded to black. A hum rose in the walls, then silence. The facility had been abandoned for years, left. Dormant after the original test stabilized, its purpose quietly erased from the network. We waited. Nothing rebooted. No response from the system. It was over. When we stepped outside, the signal was gone. No more pulses, no more bleed, just wind and sky and the distant rustle of trees. Whatever network had held us together was finally offline. For the first time, we weren't versions of anything. We were just people, fragmented, yes, but whole in ways the system had never planned for. We started walking. There was no destination, just forward. The morning after the solar flare, I tasted blood and wire, and by nightfall, 4 of our test subjects were sketching the same star map in their sleep. I didn't believe in cosmic codes or messages from beyond. I'm a biotech data analyst, grounded in facts, patterns, and anomalies. My name is Elliot Rourke. I manage neural analytics for a privately funded biotech lab just outside DC, the kind of place that doesn't advertise its address. That morning, I woke with a dry, metallic taste in my mouth, something between old copper and burnt foil. I chalked it up to stress. We'd just experienced a severe solar event, and our systems had taken a minor hit. It wasn't uncommon, but what came after wasn't common at all. During a routine neural resync study, 4 of our test subjects, all unconnected, all sedated, began speaking in identical tongues, not gibberish, structured, patterned, a language. I watched it unfold from the monitoring deck, the waveforms, on-screen spiking in harmony. It was mesmerizing. And then came the drawings. Each subject, still under mild sedation, began sketching, star patterns all matching, a lattice I'd only seen once before, in a dream I couldn't explain. I flagged the event in the system. No one else did. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. Maybe they were afraid. I wasn't, not then. I dug into archived genome logs looking for shared mutations. That's when I found it, Project Ansible. A dormant military genome project buried under Pentagon archival metadata. Files so old and so segmented it took 3 different decryption keys to get through a single layer. Most of the data set was corrupted, but one strand repeated. A genetics tag buried in the introns, like a dormant instruction set. It wasn't random, it was inserted. On a hunch, I ran my own DNA. The tag was there. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Not because I understood it, but because something deep in my body did. Something old, something I didn't remember learning. It pulsed in my ears like a second heartbeat. The next night, the dream came again. The same stars, the same lattice, and a voice, not loud, not clear, but familiar, not alien, just waiting. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. That's when the browser history started wiping itself. The anomaly in my DNA didn't trigger panic. Not right away. It was more like an itch under the skin, irritating, constant, impossible to ignore. I isolated the tag, cross-checked its sequence against public genome databases and found nothing. No disease marker. No known mutation. Just a clean string of artificial code, tucked neatly where it didn't belong. I thought I might be the only one. That illusion lasted exactly 4 days. A private message hit my encrypted inbox. No sender, no subject line. Just coordinates, a timestamp, and a single phrase. You've seen it too. I didn't respond. I ran a trace. Nothing bounced back. But then things started slipping. My home router reset every night at exactly 3:11 a.m. My cloud backups vanished. Paper copies came back blank, pages printed with faint grid lines and no text. At work, I noticed our internal logs had gaps. Routine entries missing, key access times erased. Co-workers stopped talking when I entered the room. One night, my ID badge failed. Security said it was a system update. I didn't believe them. I started reviewing past subjects from our older trials, looking for others with the same dream language anomalies. I found 5 names buried in unrelated case files, different ages, different cities, no shared histories. But when I mapped their EEG dream patterns, the matches were exact. Spikes in the right temporal lobe, synchronized deltas during REM. Like someone had flipped the same switch in all of us. Out of curiosity, or maybe desperation, I called one of them. The number rang once, then disconnected. 10 minutes later, my phone rebooted on its own. My contacts were gone. The call log was empty. But there was a new file in my photo gallery, a satellite image of a location in Wyoming. No metadata, just a clean, high-res image of a long-defunct observatory sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. I didn't remember downloading it. That night, the dream changed. The lattice of stars was still there, but now it pulsed in rhythm with something larger, something mechanical. I heard the voice again, closer this time. Not words, exactly. More like instructions being downloaded faster than I could process. When I woke, I was already packing. I told no one I was leaving, not my boss, not my sister, not even the few friends I still spoke to. I booked the flight under a pseudonym, paid cash for everything, and left my work devices behind. The less I carried, the better. Wyoming in late autumn was colder than I expected. The observatory was exactly where the image had placed it, on a high ridge, surrounded by pine and scrub, sealed off by rusted chain-link fencing and a padlocked gate that had clearly been cut before I arrived. I wasn't alone. 3 others
had already made it. A 4th arrived later that night. None of us introduced ourselves right away. We didn't need to.
There was a quiet understanding between us, like passengers on a lifeboat who had all heard the same distant siren. Inside, the observatory was dark and stripped of all official equipment, but someone had rigged basic power from a gas generator and lit the main room with low LED strips taped along the walls. We shared symptoms. The taste, the dreams, the blank photo files, showing the same star lattice. One woman, Anna, had been a linguist. She showed us her notes, lines of phonetic, symbols and translations based on a mix of ancient syntax patterns. She called it linguistic rekeying. According to her, the language wasn't invented, it was inherited, something buried deep, like dormant software suddenly running again. That night, none of us slept. Every sound outside triggered our
nerves. Around midnight, a soft buzzing passed overhead. We stepped outside and saw them, 4 drones, silent, moving in perfect formation across the tree line.
No lights, no markings, just a dull mechanical hum and a feeling in our bodies like low pressure turning inside out. We went back in, but one of us, Jonas, never made it. He'd been standing by the rear exit. We heard him start to say something, then nothing. Just a high-frequency tone and a flash of white through the trees. By the time we reached the spot, all that was left was a scorched ring in the gravel, still warm. No one spoke. We locked the doors. Then we waited for morning. We left at sunrise. There was no vote. No plan. Just a quiet consensus that staying another night wasn't an option. The drones hadn't returned, but we didn't trust the silence. GPS failed as soon as we left the ridge. Our phones showed full battery, but no service, no networks, no time. Compass readings spun. I drove without direction, following instinct more than the road. After 2 hours, we reached a service station on the edge of a rural town. I tried to send a message. The phone restarted before I finished typing. The files I'd stored were gone, folders there, but empty. Even the keyboard felt off, like it was delaying my words by a fraction of a second. We regrouped at a small motel with paper walls and rusted plumbing. No names, no questions. Anna had brought hard copies of the translations. She said the symbols had shifted, new syntax appearing overnight. The changes weren't random. They built on each other, like a sequence unfolding in real time. She believed we were being prepared, one layer at a time, to interface with something not just alien to language, but to thought itself. The rest of us had trouble concentrating. My dreams had become lucid. Cold white rooms, endless walls, a low voice counting backwards in a language I didn't understand, but somehow obeyed. That night, the motel room shook, just once. A deep vibration that passed through the floor and into our bones, followed by a long silence. We checked outside. No cars, no aircraft, nothing. But then we saw it, etched into the condensation on the back window of Anna's car. A perfect ring of symbols not drawn by hand, too symmetrical, too precise. She said it matched an ancient phoneme cluster she'd been working on, translated loosely as host world. I didn't sleep. None of us did. Around 3 a.m. I closed my eyes and saw a corridor, white, infinite, without shadow or end. A voice spoke softly, not foreign, not synthetic, just direct. Return complete. Simulation uploaded. Prepare host world. When I opened my eyes, I was already sitting up, fully alert, not afraid, just empty. By the next morning, something
had shifted, not just in the air or in the sky, but inside us.
We spoke less, moved slower, watched everything with a kind of detached awareness, like we were observing our own behavior from somewhere else. I tried retracing our steps, searching local news for any sign of Jonas. Nothing. No mention of missing persons, no drone activity, no unusual weather. It was like he'd been erased cleanly, surgically, without disruption. Anna said it matched the pattern. Selective memory control, she called it. It's not deletion, it's filtering. The others agreed. They said they'd started Losing time, moments where they'd find themselves staring at walls, holding objects without purpose, unable to recall how they got there. I hadn't noticed it in myself, but when I checked the time logs on my laptop, there were entire entries missing. Whole days gone from the activity tracker. Even offline files had been rewritten. The genetic folder I'd encrypted was still there, but instead of data, it now contained a single audio file, 2 minutes long, labeled with today's date. I played it once. It was the voice. Calm, low frequency, speaking slowly in that same dream language. But as I listened, I didn't hear it. I understood it. Every syllable hit like a memory returning. I couldn't translate it in English, but
I knew what it meant. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even communication. It was alignment, a syncing process.
like a calibration tone adjusting my body to match an invisible frequency. Anna said we were becoming transmitters. That's how she phrased it. Transmitters, not receivers. She believed the solar flare hadn't triggered anything. It had merely confirmed our presence, a kind of signal echo bouncing back to the origin. Not a call, but a response. That night, I couldn't sleep. My muscles didn't feel tired. My thoughts didn't feel like mine. I stared at the ceiling, and something in me pulsed once, subtle, internal, like a heartbeat in the wrong place. I didn't panic. I just lay still and listened. Somewhere far above, or far beneath, I heard it again. The voice, welcoming us back. The next morning, we stopped pretending we were in control. We left the motel without discussion. Anna said she'd received another message, not on her phone or computer, but in her handwriting, half a page torn from her notebook, filled in while she slept. Coordinates again. This time, deeper into the mountains, near a disused communications. Array listed as decommissioned in 1998. We followed the map in silence. The roads turned to gravel, then dirt, then nothing. We walked the last mile. The air felt heavier the closer we got, not colder, just dense, like breathing through cloth. The facility was still standing, no gates, no locks, just a concrete entrance half covered in moss, hidden beneath a canopy of skeletal trees. And yet the power was on. Inside it was clean, not recently used, but maintained somehow. The lights flickered once when we entered, then held steady. There were no labels, no signs, just a single corridor leading downward into a steel door. Behind it, the chamber. Circular. Seamless. Perfectly white, without texture or shadow. The air didn't echo, it didn't move. In the center stood a cylindrical pillar, not metal, not stone, somehow both, covered in the same pattern we'd
seen in the dreams. I stepped closer without meaning to. My hand lifted on its own. I didn't touch it.
I didn't need to. The pillar opened, not like a machine, more like an aperture widening in response to recognition. Inside, a blue mist shifted in geometric spirals, the same rhythm from the voice, the same pulsing waveform I'd felt in my chest. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Anna was already writing, her hands moving faster than her eyes could follow. The others were silent, their expressions vacant but calm. I saw their pupils dilate, then contract in unison. The mist
rose slightly but didn't escape. It wasn't gas.
It was something denser, structured, waiting. Then I heard it, this time not in my mind but in the room itself. The voice, clear and measured. Return complete. Simulation test subjects uploaded. Prepare host world. The mist dimmed, the chamber cooled. My thoughts unraveled, not in fear, but in relief. The upload had started. I don't remember leaving the chamber. None of us do. One moment, we were inside it, faces bathed in blue light, lungs filled with still air. And then we were back in our cars parked neatly outside the facility. Hours had passed, maybe more. No one spoke on the drive down. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it just felt unnecessary. Words didn't mean what they used to. My name, Elliot Rourke, felt like a story I used to tell myself. I still looked the same, I still moved the same, but something had shifted underneath, like the blueprint of who I was had been subtly revised, cleaner, more efficient. I returned home the next day. Everything was untouched, mail stacked neatly, inbox overflowing, fridge half empty. The ordinary world hadn't noticed I'd gone, but I noticed it. My job credentials still worked, but I didn't log in. My apartment didn't feel like mine. My voice sounded unfamiliar when I spoke out loud, so I stopped. I began writing instead. Long pages of symbols, structured patterns, blocks of translation I didn't consciously understand but knew were correct. I uploaded them. Not to the cloud, not to the open web, just to a drive. An old one, cold storage, like instinct. I haven't dreamed since Wyoming, not in the normal way. The visions come when I'm awake now, brief, clear, and always the same. Endless corridors, voices in calibration, a single phrase repeating like a calm instruction manual. Prepare host world. I think I know what it means. We weren't chosen. We were designed, scattered across generations, given ordinary lives, kept dormant until the signal arrived. The flare didn't cause this, it confirmed readiness, a digital handshake. We were never citizens, we were infrastructure. There's no resistance in me anymore, no fear, only precision. I document, translate, align. Each task unfolds with mechanical clarity, like running a script I never knew I had. My old life wasn't a lie, it was a staging ground. I have no need for identity, just function. The others are active too, I feel them across the grid, not connected by networks or voices, but through purpose, like signal towers blinking in rhythm. Earth wasn't a cradle, it was a vessel, and the upload is almost complete. They always crash in silence, but never unnoticed. That's what tipped me off the first time, the static, not the sound. I was 11 when the sky glitched above Nunavut. I remember it clearly because everything else in my childhood blurs. The blackout rolled in without warning, not a storm exactly, more like interference. My father called it ionospheric distortion, though he wasn't a scientist. Just a local radio operator with too much gear and not enough neighbors. That night, our shortwave caught nothing but a high-pitched pulse. He stayed up recording the static, convinced it meant something. The next morning, a news report aired. Something, some kind of object, had crashed out on the tundra. Officials claimed it was satellite debris. My father recorded that too on a crusty Maxell VHS. 3 weeks later, he was dead. An avalanche, they said. No one questioned it. But that winter, something started growing inside me, a need to understand what I'd seen. Or rather, what no one else seemed to see. The footage, the signal, the way no official agency even tried to explain the timing. It all felt too synchronized to be random. As I got older, I watched the pattern repeat. Every 11 years. Different locations, same blackout, same suppression. They always called it space junk. Always wrapped the area in military tape. Always silenced the witnesses, if there were any. And yet each time a whisper slipped through, a grainy clip on a defunct forum, a corrupted weather satellite frame, always just enough to keep me chasing. By the time I turned 20, I'd gone full rogue. No phone, no ID. I learned to scrape meteorological logs, hack into dormant weather sensors, even interpret gaps in heat maps. It wasn't just about finding the pods. It was about being there before the cleanup teams. I missed one in Kamchatka by 6 hours, another in Chad by a day, but I was getting closer. Then, in Bolivia, I made it. My name's Mason Cade. I don't talk about who I was before this. All that's left of him are burnt IDs and headaches. The ridge was bare, the air wrong. Not hot, but charged, like the edge of a storm that never arrived. I almost didn't see it, half buried in the sand. Matte black, shaped like an egg, no seams. I thought I'd find metal. Instead, I found a phone, and I think it recognized me. The phone lit up as soon as my fingers brushed its screen, like it had been waiting for me. No brand, no ports, no buttons. Just a single, glassy surface pulsing with faint blue light. I didn't know what I expected. Coordinates, maybe.
A satellite feed. Instead, a video began to play. No menu, no controls. Just a file name across the top, MK10 2035. The image was grainy but clear enough. It was me, 10 years older, beard streaked with grey, speaking into a camera at the edge of another crash site.
My voice was frantic, my eyes bloodshot. I said things I didn't understand, warnings about timelines, about recursion. Then something happened off-screen, something fast. My head jerked, my body collapsed. The camera kept rolling. There was blood, my blood. I dropped the phone. It hit the dirt and shut off instantly, like it knew I wasn't ready. I didn't sleep that night. The wind howled across the ridge, but I stayed near the pod, staring at it like it owed me answers. I ran diagnostics on my gear, checked the metadata on the footage. Everything was time-stamped for a decade in the future. No glitches, no spoofing. I tried convincing myself it was a prank, a hallucination, a sophisticated deepfake. But the voice was mine. The scar across my eyebrow, one I hadn't even earned yet, was visible on the screen. The pod remained still. No more signals, no heat. Just that matte black surface that drank in every trace of light. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I tried smashing the phone against the rocks. Nothing. It didn't even scratch. I buried it under a cairn of stone and walked away. 37 hours later, I received an encrypted file sent to an old burner I hadn't touched in months. Same formatting, same voice. Another video, this time in a forest I didn't recognize. Same ending, my death. I stared at the screen until the battery died. There was no sender. Just a subject line, MK11, find the next. I didn't know who was sending them or why, but I knew what it meant. The pattern had changed. The pods were dropping faster, and they were tracking me. I left Bolivia the next morning, but the sense of movement didn't follow me. Every bus, every checkpoint, every quiet hour of travel felt like dragging a shadow I couldn't shake. When I crossed into Chile, I bought a cheap notebook to organize what I knew. Time codes, locations, event durations. I meant to make sense of the pattern. Instead, I found pages already filled. My handwriting, same ink, same pen pressure, but I hadn't written them. Coordinates, timestamps, notes, written in a tone I recognized but didn't remember using. Some pages were warnings, do not follow. Others were worse, sketches of places I hadn't been, faces I vaguely recognized from dreams, and phrases like false retrieval and self-loop initialized. I flipped back to the first blank page and just stared, heart pounding. I ran a handwriting analysis on my laptop out of desperation. It came back 98% consistent with samples I knew were mine. Not forged, not copied, just written by me from a timeline I hadn't lived yet. That's when I noticed the circle.
A single spiral drawn at the edge of every page. Tight, precise, always clockwise. I remembered seeing the same spiral carved into the ground near the pod in Bolivia. I'd ignored it, thought it was natural erosion, but it was the same shape, the same dimensions.
It wasn't erosion, it was a marker. I found a match for the next set of coordinates, somewhere in Serbia, north of Niš. Remote farmland. I didn't hesitate. I booked a flight under a fake name, landed 3 days later, and hiked the last 12 miles in silence. The field was empty, but the air wasn't. It buzzed with that same low frequency I'd felt before, like a pressure behind the ears. I found the crater by scent first, burnt ozone and wet iron. Then I saw the pod. Smaller this time, maybe 4 feet across. Already cracked open, I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The ground around it was scorched, but in perfect circles. At the center lay a single object, a camera. My model. The one I'd lost in Morocco 6 months ago during a failed expedition. It was covered in red dirt, powered off. But when I turned it over, I saw a note taped to the battery door. It was written in my handwriting. It said, "Stop filming." I didn't remember writing the note, but I recognized the weight behind it. It wasn't a warning, it was a command, and I knew I wouldn't follow it. I powered on the camera. The screen flickered once, then displayed a single file. No menu, no timestamps, just a name, MK12 loop. The footage began immediately. It was dark, grainy, handheld. The lens moved through what looked like an abandoned underground facility. The walls were damp and tagged with spirals. My voice narrated in whispers, panicked but controlled. This is the 4th site, the same design, same distortion in memory. If you're watching this, you're not the first me. The voice paused as the camera rounded a corner. There was a wall covered in photographs, dozens of them. All of me. Different ages, different clothes, different injuries, one with a missing eye, one with grey hair. All dead, all dated, all catalogued. My voice on the footage cracked. They're not just pods, they're recorders, they're relays. Every version of me that sees one becomes the archivist, until the loop collapses. And it always collapses. I shut off the camera. My hands were shaking. I couldn't breathe. I walked away from the pod, into the edge of the tree line, and vomited. For the next hour, I sat against a tree and tried to think clearly. If each pod carried something, a recording, a message, an object tied to my future, then I wasn't tracking anomalies. I was tracking iterations, versions of myself sent back like corrupted saves in a system that refused to crash completely. And if that was true, then I hadn't found 12 pods. I'd found 12 attempts, each one worse than the last, each one ending in failure. I returned to the pod and examined the surrounding ground more carefully. That's when I noticed the second set of tracks. Someone else had been here. Same boots, same stride length, same direction. A mirror of mine. Whoever he was, he'd arrived before me, opened the pod, left the camera, and disappeared. Or maybe he hadn't disappeared, maybe he was still here. Watching. Waiting to see if I would do it differently. I scanned the trees, heart racing, and whispered aloud for the first time in hours. How many of us are still out there? I stayed in Serbia for 3 more days, unable to leave the site. I told myself I was documenting evidence, running soil scans, testing radiation levels, but the truth was simpler. I was stalling. Something had changed and I felt it in my body like a pulled muscle that never healed. My sleep fractured, my dreams began to sink. Always the same corridor, always the same flickering light, and always me running towards something I couldn't see, chased by a sound that felt like my own voice reversed. On the 4th morning, I woke to find symbols carved into the inside cover of my notebook. I hadn't done it. Or maybe I had. Spiral, spiral, hash mark, triangle. Repeated 3 times. My fingers trembled just looking at it. That afternoon, I saw a man standing at the ridge's edge, dressed in the same weathered field jacket I wore. Same height, same posture. But when I approached, he was gone. No prints in the soil. No evidence he'd ever been there. That's when I understood. I wasn't just observing the loop anymore. I was inside it. And something, somewhere, was watching how I behaved now that I knew. I stopped using my laptop, started destroying my notes as soon as I read them. But the files kept appearing. On burner phones, in hotel drawers, once even embedded in the metadata of a photo I took of my own face. Always the same pattern. A new site, a new death, always mine. But it was the anomalies in the footage that disturbed me most.
Little differences. In one clip, I was wearing a watch I'd never owned. In another, my left eye was clouded white. In another, my voice had a hitch in it, like I was fighting back tears. I began cross-referencing the audio across clips and realized something devastating. The tone of voice shifted over time. Each version of me sounded more tired, more resigned, less human. That was the tipping point. These weren't just warnings, they were measurements. Some version of me, somewhere,
Had started calibrating emotional decay, collapse behavior. How many cycles does it take before we stop resisting? I circled the final frame of the newest clip and wrote one word beneath it. Near. I didn't know if I meant time, location, or identity. But I knew the next pod wasn't far. The coordinates came wrapped in noise, static-laced GPS pings, bouncing between defunct cell towers. I triangulated them through 3 anonymous proxies, each leading to the same location, an overgrown rail yard outside Brno, Czech Republic. I arrived just after midnight. The place was silent except for the hum of electrical boxes and the wind through twisted chain link. The pod had already landed. I could feel it before I saw it. The pressure behind my eyes, that weightless nausea. Like my body didn't know what direction gravity belonged to. It was wedged between rusted train cars, blackened with heat, a faint pulse leaking from its base like a dying signal. I approached slowly, phone camera rolling even though I knew I shouldn't. The hatch was open. Inside was a single object, a man's wallet. I reached in, hands shaking, and pulled it out. My name was on the ID, my photo. But the birth date was wrong, off by 3 years. The address listed a city I'd never lived in. The license had blood on it, dried, flaking around the edges. There was cash too, euros, crisp, clean, in an amount I never carried. I turned it over and found something worse, a hotel room key branded with a logo I recognized from one of the
earlier videos. A version of me had stayed there. Or maybe was still staying there. That's when the sound started. A high-frequency modulation. Sharp but distant, like a tuning fork stuck behind my ribs. I turned off the camera. Whatever this
was, it wasn't meant to be recorded. I ran. Back out through the yard, through the weeds and fences, back into the dead streets. I didn't stop until I hit the tram line, gasping like I'd surfaced from deep water. At the hotel, the night clerk didn't ask for ID. He handed me the key without a word. Room 704. I opened the door slowly, expecting anything. Blood, a body, a mirror. But the room was empty, clean. 1 bed. 1 chair. 1 small envelope on the table. It was addressed to me, but not in my handwriting. Inside was a single Polaroid, a pod, mid-air, on fire, falling toward the ocean. On the back, just 3 words. This one ends. I checked out before sunrise. I didn't speak to the clerk. I didn't look back. The envelope stayed in my pocket, its weight somehow increasing with each hour. This one ends. It echoed in my head, not like a threat, more like an instruction, or a conclusion. I took the earliest flight south with no luggage, just the wallet I still hadn't thrown away, and the Polaroid that told me where to go. The crash site was unlogged, but the image gave enough: cliff angle, wave break, cloud line. I matched it to archived drone footage from a spill cleanup off the Peruvian coast near Talara. No official mention of a crash, but the timeline aligned, and so did the silence that followed. When I arrived, the beach was empty. No tourists, no guards. Just a roped-off section near the rocks, long since forgotten by whoever had sealed it. The pod was there, or what was left of it, half buried in black sand, split open, no contents inside. But I didn't come for the object. I came for the answer. I walked to the edge of the tide and stood where the photo was taken. Then I waited. Hours passed. The sun dropped. Shadows stretched. And then I saw him, me, walking toward the water from the opposite side of the shore. Same build, same jacket. He wasn't surprised to see me, just tired. He stopped 10 feet away and nodded, like we'd done this before. "It has to end," he said quietly. His voice was mine, but hollow. "We fracture it every time we observe, every time we try to save the data." I didn't respond. I couldn't. He pulled a phone from his pocket, same kind as the first.
"I've overwritten everything," he said. "There's 1 slot left. If you film this, it begins again. If you don't..." He trailed off. I understood.
He walked into the surf, disappearing beneath the waves without struggle or sound. I stood there until dark. Then I opened the phone. It asked me one question. Final instance? My finger hovered over the screen. Then I pressed yes, the device.
Powered down. No light, no sound, just reflection. Maybe the loop's broken now, maybe not. But for the first time, I'm not documenting. I'm just living for however long that lasts.
Every October 13th, the same suitcase appeared, untouched by time, unclaimed by anyone, and immune to every camera in the station. Emil Weiss didn't believe in patterns, not the kind people whisper about. He believed in records, serial numbers, and the logic of schedules. And that's what 19 years in Lost and Found does to a man. His days blurred into tile floors and metal lockers, fluorescent lights that flickered like dying memories. Zurich Ostbahnhof hadn't run passenger trains in over a decade. It had become a government logistics terminal, full of quiet corridors and long silences. Emil was the only civilian allowed beyond checkpoint 3. Not because he was important, but because he was invisible. The kind of man no one really sees. That made him the perfect steward of what was forgotten. Most of the luggage he processed told mundane stories: tourists in a hurry, clerks misplacing keys, tired business travelers. But locker number 116A was different. It had rules of its own. Every year, same day, same hour, a brown leather suitcase appeared inside it. No scratches, no wear, no fingerprints. The station's network of aging analog cameras captured nothing. Frames jumped, static bloomed, and then the case was there, as if it had always been. At first, Emil followed protocol, logged it, photographed it, filed a report. Then the patterns emerged. The suitcases always contained impossible objects, passports from places that didn't exist, currencies with no digital signatures, maps of the solar system that included a third moon. He told himself it was a prank, maybe something left over. from an art installation or some Cold War relic bouncing through a bureaucratic blind spot. He didn't believe in ghosts, but the weight of that suitcase never changed. Exactly 8.3 kilograms, as if engineered. The station's mainframe, when asked for records, returned an error. Locker 116A not in use. But the key worked, always. He never told anyone, not officially. He kept a separate notebook, a personal log. Each year, a new page. Notes on contents, dates, chemical tests, linguistic analysis. None of it added up. But year 7 was different. The moment he unlatched the case and saw the photo, his stomach clenched. There he was, smiling, younger, standing beneath a lavender sky with people he didn't know. He hadn't smiled like that in years. And the real terror didn't come from the image itself. It came from the thumbprint on the photo's corner. His. Absolutely his. Emil stared at the photo long after the lights in the station dimmed too. Overnight mode, there was no mistake. The angle of his jaw, the way his left eye drooped slightly when he smiled, it was him. But the people beside him were strangers. One man wore a coat stitched with symbols that resembled constellations. A woman in the background held what looked like a metallic tablet, its surface flickering with moving diagrams. The sky above them was lavender, shot through with streaks of white and a red orb near the horizon. It wasn't Earth. That much he knew. His breath slowed, then quickened again as he turned the photo over. There were fingerprints there too. One matched his. The others, he checked the next morning with a lab contact who owed him a favor, weren't human. He filed no report that year. The station's log for locker 116A had vanished. He tried to pull archived footage. The system returned empty results, then locked him out with a message he hadn't seen before. Access denied, auth level null. He brought it up to operations. The technician shrugged. That locker isn't in use, Mr. Weiss. Hasn't been for years. Emil said nothing, just nodded and left. That evening, back in his apartment, he noticed his bookshelf looked off, gaps where there shouldn't be any. He used to own a travel guide to Norway. Gone. A coffee mug with the words, "World's okayest son," gone too. The photo of his mother on the hallway table, the one she mailed before her stroke, missing. He checked the drawers, the fridge, even his coat pockets. Nothing. He stood still in the silence of the room, hearing only the low hum of the radiator and his own pulse rising behind his ears. He tore through his belongings, opening boxes he hadn't touched in years. His high school diploma was still there, his passport, but all the photos, journals, and personal notes older than 5 years were missing. He called the building super, asked if anyone had been inside. The man replied casually, "You live alone, right?" The question echoed in Emil's mind for hours after. Not because it was strange, but because for a moment he couldn't remember if that was true. Emil began arriving early. He told himself it was to monitor the station's systems, but the truth was simpler. He was afraid to be home. Each morning he walked past locker 116A, pretending not to glance at it. The overhead light above it had started to flicker whenever he passed. No other fixtures behaved this way. He had the maintenance team check it. They replaced the bulb, inspected the wiring, and ran a diagnostic on the circuit. Everything checked. Out. But the flicker continued only when Emil approached. He stopped asking questions. One afternoon, while organizing the sub-basement inventory logs, he noticed a strange entry. Elevator B, status, inactive. He didn't recognize the designation. There were only 2 elevators in the station, A and C. He checked the floor plans. No listing for B. Curious, he began tracing wires and panels in the service corridors. In a narrow passage behind the freight lift, half sealed with rusted bolts, he found a steel door. Faded letters above it read, "Lift B." There was no call button. No key slot. Just a small metallic square flush with the wall. When he brushed his fingers against it, the panel lit with a faint red glow. The door unlocked with a quiet hiss. Inside was a narrow lift car, the walls cleaner than the rest of the corridor, as if untouched by time. The panel listed only one button. 1A. He hesitated, then pressed it. The elevator groaned to life, descending smoothly without a sound. The descent lasted longer than it should have, at least 30 seconds, maybe more. When it stopped, the door opened onto a vast, silent chamber beneath the station. The floor was tiled like the upper concourse, but the walls were concrete and damp. A large metal door stood at the far end, embossed with a symbol he couldn't place, a circle, intersected by 3 lines. Above it, a faded sign read, "Transit Annex, clearance required." Emil approached, placing his hand on the door. It was warm. Not room temperature, warm, like it had been touched recently. He stepped back. The hallway behind him remained empty, but the lights above blinked once, then held steady, as if acknowledging him, as if waiting. For 3 nights Emil returned to the hidden annex. Each time the lift worked without issue. No alarms. No logs recorded his descent. He brought a flashlight the 2nd time, then a camera the 3rd. The camera failed. Battery drained within seconds. The flashlight flickered but held. He examined the corridor beyond the metal door. It remained sealed, but he noticed something. New each visit, subtle vibrations in the floor. A low-frequency pulse, felt more than heard. On the 4th night, he pressed his ear to the concrete wall. The sound reminded him of distant machinery, rhythmic and deliberate, like the churning of an engine built for a purpose long forgotten. During the day, Emil functioned on autopilot. He responded to emails, sorted abandoned parcels, and attended weekly compliance checks. But the sense of unreality grew. People addressed him by name, but no one remembered his start date. His personnel file showed a hiring date of October 13th, year unknown, literally marked as NA in the system. He visited Human Resources and asked for clarification. The clerk blinked slowly, typed a few keys, then smiled without conviction. "You've always worked here, Mr. Weiss." Later that evening, he returned to the annex, this time carrying the oldest suitcase, the one with the photo. The moment he stepped off the lift, the vibrations intensified. The metal door opened on its own. No mechanism, no sound, just a seamless shift inward, revealing a curved chamber lined with panels of matte black material. It wasn't concrete, metal, or plastic. Emil reached out. The surface was warm and faintly humming. Along the far wall a large object stood, a capsule 5 meters long, smooth and silver, labeled in clean white text. Dimensional transfer, version 9. Beside it, graffiti covered the walls in dozens of languages. He recognized none, but his mind interpreted one phrase over and over. "This version is broken." He didn't question how he could read it. Something in the room bypassed language. As he stood there, suitcase in hand, the lights dimmed slightly. The capsule door slid open, not fast, not threatening. An invitation. Emil stepped back. For the first time in years, he felt something close to fear. Not because of what was inside, but because it all felt designed for him. Emil left the annex that night without stepping into the capsule. He rode the elevator back in silence, the suitcase heavy in his hands. When he reached the surface, the locker was gone. Locker 116A no longer existed. In its place was a blank wall, seamless and smooth. No hinges, no seams. He checked the master key ring, tested it against every locker in the row. Nothing responded. Back in his office, the logbook he kept for years had vanished. Its drawer was empty, and the space smelled faintly of burned paper. When he turned on his terminal, the system booted into a setup screen, as if it had never been used. He didn't go home. He wandered the station's concourse instead, noticing things he hadn't before, subtle changes in signage, platform numbers that didn't match floor plans, announcements broadcast in languages that didn't exist. The few staff he passed moved mechanically. No eye contact, no small talk. When he greeted a maintenance worker by name, the man blinked slowly, confused. "Do I know you?" Emil stepped back, murmured an apology, and kept walking. That night, back in his apartment, the changes became undeniable. His bookshelves were full again, but the titles were wrong. Familiar bindings, unfamiliar names. The fridge held food he didn't remember buying. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked slightly off. The scar above his eyebrow from a childhood bike accident was gone. He opened his closet and found a coat he'd never seen before, stitched with a symbol, a circle intersected by 3 lines. On his desk sat a new suitcase, identical to the others. No lock, no label. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small device that looked like a scanner. The paper read, "Identity conflict detected. Version instability imminent." Beneath that, a date and time, October 13th, 4:17 a.m. Emil looked at the wall clock. It was 3:52. The scanner hummed softly. He held it to his palm. It flashed green. The device screen showed 2 words: mismatch confirmed. His vision swam. The walls of the apartment pulsed, bending inward for a moment, then snapping back. Emil sat down, steadying his breath. The capsule hadn't been an anomaly. It had been a correction. And this version, his version, was about to end. At 4:10 a.m., Emil left his apartment. The hallway outside looked the same, but the light fixtures buzzed with a faint, high-pitched tone he hadn't noticed before. His footsteps echoed oddly, delayed by a fraction of a second. He reached the street, but the trams weren't running. The digital displays showed static. A stray newspaper fluttered across the sidewalk, the date printed wrong. October 14th. His phone wouldn't turn on. His reflection in a passing window shifted out of sync. He walked to the station without thinking, not toward safety, but toward confirmation. The front entrance opened for him, even though the building should have been locked. Inside, the concourse was lit, but empty. No personnel, no sound, no recorded announcements. The elevator to the annex was waiting, doors already open, as if summoned. He stepped inside. The panel blinked once, then began to descend without input. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. The annex was colder now. The capsule door was still open. The graffiti on the walls had changed. New messages scrawled over the old ones. One phrase stood out, written in red across the curved ceiling. "You are not the first, Emil Weiss." The suitcase he'd carried downstairs days earlier was gone. In its place was another, identical in shape, closed and untouched. He opened it. Inside were documents written in his handwriting, logs, maps, diagrams. But the dates went back decades, far beyond his memory. The last page contained a photo. Emil standing beside a man who looked exactly like him. Not similar, identical. The back of the photo was marked version 6, rejected due to instability. A quiet alarm sounded, the capsule lit from within. A soft pulse, like a heartbeat, steady and calm. He turned slowly, walking toward it. As he stepped inside, the screen above the door displayed a final message. Thank you for participating in the Iterative Reality Project. The door closed with a gentle hiss. Emil felt nothing. No motion. No pain. Only a subtle sense of unraveling, as if each memory were being reviewed, weighed, and filed. For the first time he understood. This version hadn't failed. It had simply reached its conclusion, and something, somewhere, was ready to begin again. At 6:03 a.m. the station lights flickered once, then stabilized. A soft chime echoed through the concourse. Locker 116A, long sealed and absent from every schematic, now stood open. A suitcase rested inside, brown leather, unmarked, identical to all the others. The station's network, recently reinitialized, registered it without alert. No anomaly was detected. On the third floor, in an office designated for lost and found, a new officer was clocking in. His badge read M. Ristov. No photo on file.
No digital history. His employee record listed a start date of October 13th. When he logged into the station system, the credentials worked. No flags, no questions. He looked around the room, confused for only a moment. Then his eyes settled.
On the storage cabinet marked unclaimed artifacts. It was empty, except for a single notebook. Blank pages, save for a single line written at the top of the first. Track the dates. Trust nothing static. M. Ristov checked his reflection in the glass partition. His face seemed unfamiliar, but not in a way that frightened him. It was like waking from a dream and recognizing a shape before a name. He walked down to the locker corridor, keyring in hand. When he passed locker 116A, the overhead light flickered once. A quiet hum came from
inside the case. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. A group of people stood under a pale sky with 3 moons, smiling.
He was among them, younger, relaxed. There was no label, no timestamp, just a folded map beneath it of a solar system he didn't recognize, marked with red ink where no planet should be. He closed the suitcase carefully and carried it back to the office. Later that morning, he began a private log. The entries were methodical, descriptions, measurements, questions. There was no mention of Emil Weiss. No one by that name appeared in any registry, but the name felt familiar, like a word heard once in a dream. At 11:42 a.m., a message arrived. In the system queue, iteration, 10 queued for assessment. M. Ristov read it without reaction. He looked at the flickering light above the locker one more time, then wrote a single sentence in the notebook. This version feels quieter.